Hello there, my name is Hannah and you are watching Gamers Waypoint. So you might have noticed that I've moved position again and I'm going to be trying out this new corner for this week's episode. Obviously I've got my lovely computer here that's displaying the luscious logo for Gamers Waypoint, so hopefully it looks a bit better than last week, because although I didn't mind last week's video, as I was editing it I could see that the TV just wasn't looking quite as good as it did in previous videos. So I'm trying this out because, as I said, my new room is not optimum for filming. It's not the most friendly in that regard. So here we are, and I'm sat down, which means that hopefully I won't get another crippling case of pins and needles like I did last week. My god, I tried to stand up, I just couldn't. I couldn't actually stay on my feet because I'd been like knelt down for so long in front of that camera. So here we are, we're going to be giving this a go, and this week I want to talk about a very special game, one that is close to my heart, which is also close to many other people's hearts. So I'm not the only one, I know. But the question I'm going to face you with at the moment, at this part of the video, is we all love happy endings, don't we? We love when life goes right, and we love when great things happen to us. And yet, Dontnod seems to be allergic to happy endings. This video I'm going to be talking about the Life is Strange series, and it's definitely not going to be delving into whether I think it's good or bad. Obviously it's one of my favourite games, so I think it's fantastic, not just good. But yeah, let's talk about all of the endings to the Life is Strange series. So we see happy endings in a lot of mediums. Obviously you get them in video games, you get them in TV, and you get them in films. But obviously there are countless examples of times when we don't get happy endings, and that is something that just kind of mimics life. Like I said, we love when life goes well, but I'm betting that so many people have a lot of stories about when it didn't go so favourably. Anyway, what was that voice? Did I do that? And sometimes we experience these instances in video games where it really doesn't go the way that we expected. The most recent example I have of that is The Last of Us Part 2, which I would say I'll stop harping on about, but I probably won't because I'm still broken from that game. I honestly believe I'm like forever changed as a person because I'm just not over it. I don't think I'm ever gonna be over it, but obviously no spoilers for that game. There will be spoilers for Life is Strange, but in The Last of Us Part 2 it just, I'd say completely takes a U-turn. It doesn't go in a direction that is completely unfathomable or unprecedented, but at the same time it sure does know how to pull at them heartstrings, and my god if it didn't do just that. So we know instances where you don't get a load of rays of sunshine at the end of your story and your narrative, but the thing that gets me about Life is Strange is, yes, there aren't any what would be considered actual happy endings in this game or in this series, and it just seems to be something that Dontnod like to play around with. Now, that is mimicking real life, but what I would consider these endings to be is somewhat possibly hyper-realistic, in the way that they really just do not give way to an ending that is fully fulfilling. This is to say as well, they are brilliant games and the endings are brilliant, which is also, it just sounds so contradictory, doesn't it? Brilliantly sad. But that's what they are at the end of the day, or at least that's what I perceive them to be. Once again, disclaimer, if there are any views in this video that you don't agree with, that is absolutely fine. Everybody experiences video games in their own sweet way. So just bear with me whilst I get these thoughts out of my head, really. I've been wanting to make a video about Life is Strange for a while, couldn't quite pinpoint the exact thing I wanted to talk about, and then literally about an hour ago in the shower it popped into my head, and here I am, pressing record and jabbering on at you lot, which is very nice that you're here as well, by the way. If you're new here, hi, thank you for the support, and if you're old here, hi, thank you for the support. It is all very much appreciated. But yeah, the hyper-realistic kind of sadness of these games, and I kind of got to thinking about why we still play them when we want to be filled with kind of like wholesome content, or, you know, just funny content, uplifting content really, especially in times like these where people are obviously struggling with a lot. With regards to my previous statement, Dontnod being allergic to happy endings, maybe not quite so much. Happy endings in the Life is Strange series, definitely, but no spoilers, especially because it was only just released. But tell me why, despite the fact that it does have some really sad, heart-pulling moments in the game, its ending is actually quite alright. It doesn't leave you with that burdened feeling that the Life is Strange games give you. And once again, that's not to say that, well, it's not to say I like that feeling, but it's not to say that I hate the concept of the fact that they do this. It's more that I find it very intriguing and, in a way, possibly a little bit brave, because you're not just catering to people when you're doing these video games. You are actually exploring the narrative that they wanted to give you. They don't kind of sugarcoat things. And like I said, that lends itself back to the very realistic nature of the endings. But first things first, obviously starting with the first game, obviously massive spoiler warning ahead. I'm going to be talking about all 3 games that currently exist within the Life is Strange universe. So if you've not played any of them, or you don't want to know about them just yet, you might want to press pause on the video. But yeah, the first game, and this isn't going to be talking about the fact that the entire game boils down to 2 main choices. That's a tale as old as time, Bay or the Bay. Obviously you have the 2 endings of that game. The one where Max has to just go back to the start and let Chloe go, essentially, which is heart-wrenching. And this isn't a video talking about soundtracks, but whoo! When Foles starts playing at the end of that ending, I well up. I might also do a video specifically about the Life is Strange soundtrack, because I also think that's very important. But you get to the end of that game and it's saddening because you realise that you couldn't escape any of the outcomes that you were trying to escape and evade. Like, the game is all about consequences. All 3 games are about consequences, and they deal with them in different ways. And so obviously in the first game, you feel like you should be this almighty powerful person because you can rewind time. But obviously because of chaos theory, it then in turn has to be, well, you can't just displace time. And so it creates a storm. And so the more you change in the game, the more havoc is created by Max's powers. And so despite the fact that you're always trying to run away from certain things in the game, whether it be, you know, Jefferson or whether it be Chloe's fate, it's always catching up to you. And it's so sad because obviously you get to that, what is probably seen as the canonical ending, and you have to just give up everything that you've tried to do, especially because I said I wasn't going to go into the fact that it comes down to 2 main choices, but it does mean that nearly everything was for nothing. Max's takeaway is that she has some more memories with her best friend that she's not seen in years, but in the end, she's just still gone. And like I said, that song starts playing and I'm like, oh, emotional. And then in the slightly less canonical ending, where you choose to keep Chloe, which, can't lie, I picked that ending first and I felt so bad about what happens to Arcadia Bay, and every time I've replayed it since, which I think is 3 times, I've picked the one where you sacrifice Bay, which is just, I don't like it. It's not a choice that makes me feel comfortable. I don't take solace in it. I'm gonna get off this topic because I'm gonna start getting all twisted. But anyway, your choices obviously do mean something to an extent, but you have to relinquish Arcadia Bay because of it all, which means that you still haven't evaded it. And like I said, both of these storylines are saddening, because you find out later on as well in the second game that if you chose to go with Chloe, the nice thing is that they're still together, and there's a picture that David has of them, which is all sweet, but he loses Joyce. I mean, he loses Joyce no matter what as well, but obviously she gets caught in the storm and doesn't escape. And Joyce is lovely, she gives you eggs and bacon and pancakes and stuff, so it's really, it's really horrific to find that out. And obviously you can look over at Arcadia Bay in the second game and it's gone. it's demolished, obviously, by natural occurrences. And so it's really hard to see because you made that choice. Those are consequences of your actions. And going back to the David and Joyce thing, you find that he can never keep Joyce anyway, because if you choose the one where you sacrifice Chloe, that tears them apart. They still talk, but they're not together. And do you know what, it sounds weird that I'm kind of harping on about this point about David and Joyce, because for the majority of the game we obviously really dislike David, but he becomes a little bit of a hero at the end of the game if everything goes according to plan. And it does make you feel bad for him, especially because he's mellowed out so much in the second game. And so that's the thing as well, you have to carry that feeling over with you, despite the fact that in the second game you get a bunch of new characters and 2 new protagonists. You still have to kind of own your choices because they are reflected in other NPCs and they are literally like depicted with regards to whether Arcadia Bay stands or whether it's gone. And then obviously you have the ending of the second game with Sean and Daniel, and there are a few more outcomes, but still none of them are happy. They range from being like really sad to just moderately sad. Like, there is no escape. Once again, it's a game about consequences, and so the choices that you make with Daniel throughout that game do matter in some part a lot more than in the first installment, but it just kind of lends itself to more endings. And so the best case scenario, this is the thing, the best case scenario for the ending of that second game is that Sean goes to prison and then comes out 15 years later or whatever and is reunited with his brother and his best friend and possible girlfriend if you chose to sleep with Cassidy, is it? And obviously you see your mum again. Like, that is all well and good, but the fact is that Sean still loses a large chunk of his life for a crime he didn't commit. I know he goes on to commit crimes after that, but it obviously forces his hand for the fact that nobody believes him about the fact he didn't commit the first one. And it just gets to feeling so hopeless. And obviously throughout that ending, you go on a camping trip with Daniel and it's nice because they're bonding and they're reconnecting, but obviously you can see in Sean's eyes that he's missed so much. And he just starts to cry, and then I cry, and then we all cry, and oh my gosh. And so it's just, it doesn't ever let up, and I suppose it feels like, why doesn't Dontnod just want to give us a Life is Strange ending that is more light-hearted or just more feel-good? But once again, it lends itself back to the title, Life is Strange. And despite the fact that we love happy endings, the truth about life is that it is moments of great joy and wonder interspersed and entwined with moments of despair and sadness, and it has to obviously delve into both of these things. And in the narratives that are created in these games, due to the massive chain of consequences that erupt because of how the games begin, I suppose there isn't really kind of a happy ending that can occur. Some people kind of see the happier ending of Life is Strange 2 as being when Sean manages to get across the border by himself, not with Daniel, and meets up with Cassidy. But despite the fact that he's safe and Daniel's safe, Daniel still has like one of those home watch bracelets on his ankle, so he's under house arrest, and they can't actually ever meet again unless Daniel's able to go over to the border, because Sean can't risk coming back over to America because he'll just get arrested and then he'll do his prison time. So despite the fact that they're living like okay lives, it's still heartbreaking in that respect. And oh my gosh, if they both go over the border, I just can't take it. It breaks my little heart. And then obviously there's the option where only Daniel gets over the border and Sean doesn't make it at all. That is obviously the saddest one of all. It's awful. But yeah, those are pretty much the choices. And so you either have to choose to have your character forego a large part of their life to then be able to be with their brother in person, or you have them commit an illegal act for the brothers to be forever separated. There is no solace in that, none whatsoever. But then the horrible fact is that if something like that were to happen to someone, which it's not uncommon in some respects, that is probably what would happen. And I think sometimes we just get so hyperfixated on this idea of wanting something great and wonderful and happy that we try to push back all the things that are horrible and unpleasant. And these games are not afraid to delve into those kinds of things. They are being, like I say, true to themselves in their narrative because they take it all away. They don't pull back at the last minute. They don't create some false happy ending and false sense of identity within the story that it's telling. It just takes you with it on that journey and is unapologetic about it, which is really brave writing in a way. Like I said, it's heart-wrenching and it's soul-destroying sometimes. In that respect, it's like well written. Obviously you have Before the Storm as well, and that is the same. It bears itself on consequences. But the difference with that is because obviously you have played the first game by this point, you know how that's going to end. You can make the ending to that game a little bit nicer, just in case you didn't know. If you take Rachel's bracelet and then give it to her mum, she'll meet her mum, which is really nice, and obviously kind of the main aim of the game to some extent. So you can achieve that, which feels a little bit nicer. I personally have never taken a bracelet, but those are my choices to own up to. But because of the outcome of the first game, you know that the very ending of Before the Storm is going to remind you that despite the fact that you've had all that loveliness, you know that obviously Chloe is by herself by the time the first game rolls around. But that's the thing as well, it's still unapologetic in that respect, because instead of making a prequel that was just the good parts and some obviously edgier parts of Chloe's life and Rachel's life, it reminds you of what happens in the first game, and you feel like that pang in your heart, like, because it's like a montage at the end and you're like, oh, that's good, and they're hanging out and everything like that, and then it kind of fades to black for a second and then it reminds you, and it's just like, oh. Because do you know what the weird thing is? You kind of forget for a second. For a second you forget, and I think that's an important thing, because nobody wants to go through this life feeling sad, unfulfilled, obviously, but that's the thing, kind of like what video games do for us. They allow us to forget for a second about the things that are bothering us, and they are a form of escapism. That is not new news. That is obviously a concept that has been told many a time since video games were created. We're able to focus our concentration on something else that is outside of the reality that we live in. But yeah, you forget for a second and then it drops it back on you, and it's so weird because it's a bomb that's already been dropped and it gets re-dropped and it seems to hit just as hard, which is awful. And just as a side note, by the way, I really enjoyed Before the Storm. Like, I rate it as highly pretty much as the other games, which I know is kind of a controversial topic for a lot of people, but I think that they did it pretty well. And obviously it was Deck 9 that did it instead of Dontnod, because Dontnod was doing Life is Strange 2. So if you've kind of missed out on Before the Storm for whatever reason, whether it be because you heard reviews and you didn't like how it sounded, I would still recommend that you give it a try, because I think it does actually flesh out Chloe's story quite a bit more, and it's really interesting to see her 2 years before she is reunited with Max. I think it does it really well, and when you replay that first game again, it once again hits harder, it adds to it, which I think is a really great thing, because despite the fact that you feel sad for Chloe with respect to what's happened to Rachel in the first game, you still have this perception of, well, I didn't know Rachel, whereas as soon as you've completed Before the Storm, you're like, I know Rachel, like inside and out, know how she is, and despite the fact it's not perfect, it still just makes it feel really sad. And also the bonus DLC for Before the Storm, where they are kids and it's so light-hearted for like almost all of it. It seems to be just that the secret is that Max is going to Seattle, and that weighs on you, but for the most of the gameplay it's just light-hearted, wholesome goodness, them being pirates, which is mentioned so many times in the main game. And I still feel really bad about playing that DLC, because despite the fact I've played the game so many times, I forgot what happens. And so at that point where I had the chance to tell Chloe that I was going away, when it's like, oh, we're gonna go to the beach, I was like, tell you what, let's go to the beach, bounce a ball around, and I'll tell her after. And then when Joyce comes in with that news, and I'm like, oh no, I missed it. I missed the opportunity, and now it's so much worse. And when she listens to that tape cassette at the end, and I'm like, I'm an awful person. I'm horrible. I've ruined everything. So, like I said, Dontnod just keeps hitting hard, like over and over and over again in all three games. And so with that fact in mind, it's understandable why you would possibly come to the conclusion of like, well, why do we play these things? You'd be remiss for thinking that, because it's what we like are relatable stories. What we like are seeing ourselves mirror imaged and reflected on the screens that we play to some extent. It's not going to be exactly the same as watching our own life, but just as we take solace in knowing that there's good out there, and obviously there is still good out there, we also take some sort of backward solace in seeing what can happen, and these games lend themselves to that. They let us indulge in something a little bit more sad in a safe way, and I think it's a good thing in a way, which sounds awful because I don't like feeling sad, and I don't want anyone to feel sad either, but what it does is it explores that emotional spectrum. So obviously there are games out there that are just first-person shooters, you've got your battle royales, they don't really evoke a sense of anything apart from competition, enjoyment, and being competitive. It's obviously just may the best man win. You get to rejoice in your ability to be better than everybody else and be the most competent player. Similarly, you obviously have kind of like kids games, and they're lovely and they are light-hearted and fluffy and obviously all things good, which is what's needed, but this is why it's great, because you have something that caters for everything. And so Life is Strange, as I said, it's called Life is Strange because it discovers that array of emotion, it explores it, and it doesn't leave anything left unturned in that respect, because that is how life is. It is strange, it is complicated and varied, and obviously in these games you do have moments of absolute wonder and happiness and the feeling that everything is good. And so it doesn't completely bear down on you with this overwhelming desire to let you know that despite the fact that you are taking part in a form of escapism that you can't really escape, because it sits there as well to remind you that life can be beautiful and it can extend hands to you that bring brilliant things that you will remember for the rest of your life. But like I said, video games are an art form. I said this last week, I think, and they are on the same page for me as films, and because they are an art form and another means of expression, they go into all of these things that the other mediums go into, but it just makes me laugh because they stick so hard to their guns. Dontnod, just like I said, don't budge. Life is Strange is all-encompassing as a title, but they just, I suppose, take the rough with the smooth, but give you a slightly rougher side of it, which I would say that not many video games do. They obviously delve into the darker parts of stories, but I think that to some extent there's always a resolve. Like even with Beyond Two Souls, there is a lot of darkness that happens in that game, but it still gives you back the reins at the end of the game and is like, you now have control to take this where you want, to feel relieved and have that sense of catharsis. Once again, not always the case, The Last of Us Part 2, but it's kind of backwards and interesting the fact that Dontnod hand you those rains back, but they are basically like, here's a dark rain and here's an even darker rain. Here you go. Which do you want? And obviously there's the element of, once again, what we were talking about last week, where you can't always foresee these things because it's a game about making choices and your choices stick and have consequences. So I suppose the lesson of this video is, it doesn't matter whether you can rewind time, have telekinesis, or have a loud mouth that can talk yourself out of situations. Life is always going to be strange, and Dontnod is always going to kick you in the heart. I hope that this video has come across how I was meaning it to. I just think it's really intriguing how Dontnod are great at writing, despite the fact that they do have some kind of cringy dialogue sometimes, and are able to explore the plane of kind of human existence and show you all these different emotive aspects. But it just occurred to me that throughout all 3 games, you don't necessarily ever get that very fulfilling feeling. And like I said, that's realistic and it is relatable. There are some things in life that never quite get that happy feeling. But yeah, maybe if there's a Life is Strange 3, maybe we'll get a slightly happier ending and we'll be able to get the one that makes us feel slightly more warm inside. Because like I said, Tell Me Why has that. Tell Me Why has quite a heartwarming ending, depending on what you choose. There is one where you can kind of choose to be in denial a little bit more, but I suspect that it'll be a similar ending as to the one if you find out the actual truth. So I suppose we'll just have to see how Twin Mirror goes as well, because that's an upcoming Dontnod game. And well, it's not a Life is Strange game, so maybe we'll get a happy ending. And once again, this is not me crying about not all games having happy endings. As I say, I think that they are expertly and exquisitely written, and I commend them for the fact that they don't just cater to their audience and they dare to overstep the boundaries and take risks with their storytelling. It's just sometimes you gotta play these games in a certain mindset, because otherwise you'll just need a lot of tissues because they can be very heartbreaking. But once again, that also is commendable because it means that they wrote it well enough for you to care. Like, there's nothing worse than when you play a video game and when you see the outcome you're just not bothered about what happens to the character, because it means that they've not been able to instill that sense of investment in the player. You don't feel invested in the character, therefore you are not that bothered about what happens to them, and the entire point is for you to care what happens to them. Like I said, it's just a realistic representation, and I find it really interesting that we don't always wish to see the things that we can't have. We do wish to see the things that are relatable to us and that we can understand. But then again, it does also help us to sometimes feel better about ourselves because we see other examples of where it's happening. Even if it is in a fictional video game, it just sometimes feels safe to know that it's not you feeling alone. This is getting a little bit deep, isn't it? But also they do give you depictions of really great things as well. So it just shows you that life can be balanced. That's going to be a terrible spin-off game if there ever was one, but there you go, life is balanced. You've just got to find the balance within it. All Cobra Kai there. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I hope it was informative and that I was able to get my point across. I know I get a little bit rambly and waffly in these videos, so I do apologise. I am trying to make them slightly more analytical, but I'm aware that each video is an opportunity for improvement. But thank you for sticking around, especially if you've made it to this point of the video. I really appreciate that. Like I said, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot and I'm really grateful for it. If you want to read some articles, don't forget to go and check out the website. All the links for everything you might need are in the description box below, so go and check those out. There are also other videos that you may feel free to watch, that would be much obliged, about various different topics. If you think that there is a game that would be good for me to talk about, please do let us know in the comments below and also start a discussion. It's always great to see what you guys think, just no trolling. And until next time, I hope that you guys have a great day. I hope that you'll stick around with us for the long run, and as always, don't ever stop exploring. See you later, guys.